Hello, Channel Automation podcast listeners. Welcome back to another deep dive into the techniques that convert leads. I'm your host, Casey Arias, and today I'm joined by Gerry Christensen again with Call ID Reputation. Thanks for joining in again, Gerry. How you feeling today?
Oh, great. And thanks. It's great to be back.
Yeah, we had such an interesting conversation last time. And if you haven't listened to that podcast already, I absolutely recommend going back and taking a listen to that. We were talking about basically the reasons that you may not have good connection, how the travel of calls from call centers ends up going through carriers, where the blocks might be, and all the technicalities that go behind that. Super, super interesting stuff. So if you haven't already listened to that, I definitely recommend it. But we're going to be expanding on some of those topics today, starting with very briefly, you mentioned last time RCD, which is rich call data. And this is something that I was immediately drawn to. It's a way that makes your calls coming in stand out. So if you don't mind, Gerry, do you mind doing like a quick recap of that?
So I'll start very high level and talk about branded calling, and then we'll talk about how the current instantiation of branded calling, how it's different from RCD, rich call data. So branded calling today, I'm not sure how many of your readers or listeners have heard of that, but it's basically a new UI or a new user experience, UX, for people, where instead of just what the experience used to be going all the way back to 2007 when a smartphone first came out, which for all intents and purposes, that's what most people see when a call comes through. It's either just the number or maybe the name or a name and number. With branded calling, you get a lot more information. You might get not only the name of a business, and by the way, branded calling is typically going to be some kind of an organization. It's going to be a business or maybe government or maybe an NGO. It's not going to be a consumer like you or myself. It might be the companies that we work for that would use it, but typically it's going to be a consumer-facing brand, because the whole idea is that when they place a call, instead of just seeing the number and maybe the name, you would see perhaps a logo of the company that's calling you. Like if it's a bank, you might see the logo of the bank. And also the skin of the call, instead of being your standard background, like I don't know what yours is, Casey. I think mine might be green when I get a call. I don't know. Or I don't know. I don't even, that's how unmemorable
Mine's very plain Jane.
I bet it is very plain Jane. And that's just the point. It's very unmemorable and generic. With branded calling, you might have a purple background if perhaps the color scheme of whoever's calling you uses purple or whatever they want. So you would have the number, the name of the business that's calling you, a special color scheme that they might want, their logo, and maybe even the intent of the call. And I think the example I gave the last time we talked is, and it's just picking this randomly, but I think it's a good example. ADT, the company that monitors for security, they might be calling you because an alarm's going off, or they might be calling you because they're offering Gerry an upgrade to his system. So the intent of the call might say something, and it's not going to be super verbose, but it might be just a few words or a sentence to give you an idea what the call's all about. So that's branded calling. And now I'll jump into the difference between how branded calling is being done today versus how it'll work with RCD. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I don't know if you mentioned the background with the colors before. I think if I was getting an incoming call, because everything is just black with the letters coming through every time I get an incoming call, I don't know if that's an iPhone only thing or if that's across the board with any kind of phone that you have. If I got something even from like ADT that was blue and had a logo, I'd be like, what the heck? Like that would really draw my attention. But yeah, go on with the next part of it.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea. And stepping back for just a moment, the problem, and there's actually multiple problems that branded calling is trying to solve, is that consumers don't know what to trust. And even that is a multifaceted problem, including from a UI UX perspective. When a consumer gets a call, how can you recognize just by looking at the screen and literally within a second or two, right? Or maybe 3 seconds, because the time you have to decide the answer to that call is very limited. That's where voice is very different than text messaging. Text messaging, you've got time to consider it. Do I reply, whatever. But with a call, if you don't answer it, is this gone? They might leave you a voicemail, maybe not. You might miss an important call. So the whole idea is to make it answerable. There's no guarantee that people will answer it, but have a greater probability that they will answer it. But there's multiple problems to solve. I mentioned one of them is, how do you even recognize as a consumer that it should be trusted? Case in point, a non-branded call thing that some consumers may see today is a little green check mark, or it might say trusted caller or something like that. Now, literally, all that means is that that particular call has received some form of authentication. And what that means is that most likely that the network and the number that that call is coming from are recognized. And that's good. I'm not going to denigrate that. I'm not going to undermine that and say that that's not good. However, there are some calls where the network and the number are recognized that are still unlawful, because there's other things going on in the network. And so that gets back to what are some of the problems that we're trying to solve. Well, one of them is a UI UX problem. Another one is a KYC problem, know your customer. And one of the issues with that is there are varying degrees of diligence that companies do from a KYC perspective. Some are super diligent. They ask lots of questions like, KC, who are the principal people in your company? How is your company organized? Give us upload your articles of incorporation. We want to know, are you a Delaware company? They might even get really super personal. And by the way, these are questions that should not violate consumer PII, but they're more personal questions in some cases, or business questions that are really getting into the details of a business so that you know whether you trust them or not. So might ask for you to provide government issued ID, might ask, have you ever been convicted of a crime, might do a background check on you, all these kinds of things. And by the way, if you've ever gotten a certificate for a website, HTTPS, depending on what level you get there, these are a lot of the same questions that are asked, because they want to have traceability to the owner of that website. So that way, if a crime actually does happen, they can track somebody down. Same should be true with business calling in general, but especially for branded calling, because if you're going to be providing a branded call, you don't want any unlawful activity to happen, but there's never a guarantee that it won't. So that's why traceability is important, because if it does happen, I know how to track you down. I know, you're a Delaware-based corporation. I've got your maybe a photocopy of your driver's license or whatever. Maybe I've done a background check. And I don't allow you to do branded calls because maybe I found out that you're a convicted felon, or maybe you've received a cease and desist letter from the FCC saying that you can't even place calls anymore.
I have a question on that, because we're talking about websites a little bit. And by the way, this is a reminder to all the business owners out there that have a really lovely company website. I just want you to know that a lot of our clients that we work with off and on, you keep forgetting to renew your security or your certificate in order to be authenticated, and then nobody can get to your website. So if you haven't been to your website for a long time, you should check that and make sure that it's active. But secondly, so maybe you're a convicted felon and you're getting flagged for these things. What if it's just you? Is it you as a business owner, or how are they determining this person is associated with this call or this website if it's a whole company?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it's a really good segue. It's almost like we planned that in advance. That's not that wasn't planned to be a softball question, but it kind of is, because that underscores the problem with KYC is there's no consistency. I wish there were guidelines to be able to answer your question exactly, but there's not. It's highly subjective, and it varies considerably from one company to another. So one company might very judiciously say, if there's anybody working for this company that wants to do business with me that's ever been convicted of a crime, I'm not going to do business with you. And that's their right to do so, right? Or maybe if it's only the principal person. And by the way, that was a somewhat obtuse example, because you're not necessarily going to find people that are convicted of a felony. Everybody's gotten a traffic ticket or whatever. But maybe more to the point, there needs to be some base guidelines that everybody should follow, such as, is somebody wanting to transact with you, aka do a branded call with you, originate calls with you, et cetera, that maybe has run afoul with the telecom ecosystem in the past, aka they've been found to be originating bad traffic, or even worse, some of the stuff we've seen in the headlines. And I'm not going to name names, but your viewers could easily Google this. There's been some companies that just do crazy stuff, like allegedly creating websites to have a lead farm, to do unlawful stuff, and then they even handle the unlawful traffic. So anyway, getting back to that, this is just Gerry Christensen's opinion. For those kind of people that maybe move on and then try to start a new business or whatever, it might be a good idea from a KYC perspective to see who were these folks, and then ask yourself a question: should we let them do any kind of business calling, let alone branded calling? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
And that's unfortunate because, I mean, there is such a, this is going to probably be a hot take, but there is such a wide range of people that or of things that are designated as like a felony or a crime. And just because you may have done some shady stuff in the past, or worse, worked for someone who did shady stuff in the past and you didn't even know that was going on, now you are basically banned for life. I mean, that's what it sounds like you're saying. And that's unfortunate.
Well, and as a disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, and this does not constitute legal advice.
Neither am I.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good disclaimer for us. And truthfully, we're just having a conversation here, and this is best served as sort of anecdotal reference point that you can have super stringent KYC on one extreme, and then on the other extreme, you might just ask really basic questions like, okay, your name is Casey, I know your phone number, I know your email address, and you've paid me. Sure, go ahead and do business, because we know with the ecosystem the way it is today, especially with CPaaS, literally if KYC is really weak and you have a laptop, you could be up and running and banging out robocalls in 10 or 15 minutes, right? That's on the other extreme, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And
so,
yeah, they may not get flagged, and they are actually what you would call the bad actors in the business. So absolutely.
Yep. Some of them could be bad actors, and there's varying degrees of bad actors too. Some that are outright fraudulent, brand impersonation, claim to be the Social Security Administration, but they're not. And they just want to rip you off. They literally want to steal from you either money and or your identity. That's like the worst of the worst. But then there's those in the middle that maybe they're not trying to steal from you per se, but they're skirting around the rules. Maybe they're violating the Federal Trade Commission's telemarketing sales rule. Maybe they're violating the spirit and intent of the Truth in Caller ID Act, that type of thing. So, but getting back to branded calling, the things that it's trying to solve are the UI UX issues, the KYC issues, and then the third really important thing, there's actually a fourth one too, but the third really important thing that goes together with that is authentication. Because you want to be sure when you're doing a branded call that it's not spoofed. That's the main reason to do authentication. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because it varies considerably between how branded calls are done today versus how they're done or how they will be done in the future with RCD. But then the fourth one that kind of is an overlay to all three of those is monitoring. And we kind of touched on it a minute ago, which is even if I've done the best KYC possible, you still could do something that is not desirable. And the anecdote that I use is a speeding ticket. Gerry Christensen has never been convicted of a felony, right? I'm not a convicted felon. That's why, by the way, if you ever get pulled over by policemen, if you simultaneously give them your driver's license and your concealed carry permit, they know you're not a convicted felon, because you can't get one of those if you're a convicted felon, just FYI. But if I am speeding through a school zone, I deserve a speeding ticket, right? Do I deserve a second chance to drive? Absolutely. Unless I do it at 2 times, 3 times, whatever. Eventually the judge is going to say, Gerry, you're a danger to society because you just can't stop speeding through school zones. And
why are you doing that, Gerry?
So maybe
you're putting the kids in danger.
Well, I would be. I mean, it's we joke a little bit, but truthfully, if somebody was either psychologically or physiologically something's wrong with them if they keep doing that, right? Or maybe there's a problem with their car, which would be really bizarre. But in that sort of obtuse example, if I repeatedly am speeding through school zones, I should probably have my license suspended. It's actually a good analogy here, because you could have a lawful business that you've done really good KYC with, and then all of a sudden they just go off the rails. Like they're repeatedly calling numbers that appear to be a TCPA violation. We can't be quite sure, but there's indicators for that, such as repeatedly calling numbers that have never been allocated to somebody, because why would you be calling a number that has never been allocated, right? It just doesn't make sense. Maybe they're not using the reassigned number database, so they accidentally call the wrong number. We recommend that you use the R&D, because maybe you're calling a number that opted in, but it's no longer belonging to that same person. So I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but this is why monitoring is so important, because just because you've done your KYC and you're doing these UI things and you've authenticated doesn't mean that everything is always going to be okay. You still need to monitor. So that's the fourth thing.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. And like I said, like we can provide advice, but we're not lawyers or with the law. And so absolutely, when it comes down to state laws and what is regulated, you should be checking your lists. It's not one of those things where you can just always use the same list and call or text over and over again, because just like Gerry was saying, people transfer phone numbers and then maybe these new guys didn't opt in. And so just good business practice is constantly making sure that the people that you are calling are able to take those phone calls. And one of the things I wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit more on, and this is something we also just discussed last podcast, about squeezing out the bad guys by the good guys dominating the space with incoming calls that are obviously legit. So what's like another way that companies can instill trust in the people that they're contacting other than maybe branded calls? Like something where it's like, okay, I am 100% trustable. This is why. And we're getting the bad guys out of here.
I think there's a lot of things that we can do. So we'll come back to branded calling in just a second. But all these things are interrelated. And I would say, and this is a good segue to touch on the recent FCC ruling with respect to third-party consent, because I think that is also, in addition to branded calling, that is also one of the things that's going to squeeze out the bad guys. And by the way, I've started referring to this as Christensen's law. There's something called, in economics, called Gresham's law, which basically says that bad money pushes out the good. And I guess he was like an economist in the 1800s or whatever. So Christensen's law is the inverse of that. It is the good pushes out the bad. And so with this recent FCC order, which basically says if you are using regulated technology, you're using ATDS, and by the way, there's some lawyers that are disputing whether it has to be regulated or if it's a manual, non-regulated system, if maybe you have a loophole. I'm not going to get into that. I'll leave that up to the lawyers to get into the ticky-tacky details of the verbiage. But if you really want to kind of future-proof yourself with what the FCC is saying, whether you use an ATDS or not, you need to do express written consent on a one-to-one basis, and it needs to all be documented. That's just another way to say that you have traceability and accountability on an end-to-end basis. And so if you can say that you have that, that's powerful, because it's kind of implicit that if KC opts in for me to contact her, that I'm not going to be a bad guy, right? However, again, getting back to this monitoring thing, if I do, it's important to have that traceability so that, KC opts in so Gerry can contact her, and then I basically defraud you. I do something wrong that you dispute, and we don't work it out, and maybe you go to the Better Business Bureau, maybe you just say, Gerry, you're a crook, and I'm going to take you to court. Well, you've got all these breadcrumb trails there because you've opted in and we've got all these things in place. So you can hold me accountable, right? Which again, gets back to this is why I say they're all interrelated, which gets back to the KYC, because if I do this and then, I don't know, maybe a court of law or maybe the FCC or FTC says, Gerry, you shouldn't be doing business anymore because you just did really bad stuff. Then I can't, act like a nomad and do a different LLC and try to do it with somebody else, right? So short answer, I think that the new FCC rules will be part of that sort of euphemism there, that Christensen's law thing, where once companies start doing that and they have all this documentation, that will push out the bad stuff as well. That's my opinion.
I think that that's a good way to, I'm hoping you're right. I really am. And one of the things I wanted to elaborate on is, especially if you're in a business that has very high risk of being reported to the Better Business Bureau, whether you're at fault or not, you have to be especially careful of this. So one of the things that I talked about with one of our past podcast guests is that contracting, it's like you feel like you were defrauded potentially, but you may not be actually in the wrong. It's just this person's like, I expected this, this, and this, and you did not provide that. So they go to the Better Business Bureau and they make that complaint. And that's why it's very important that after you do business with somebody and they are, they're not 100% happy with what you've done, maybe they leave a bad review, that you are immediately coming back and approaching that person and say, what can we do to make it right? And that goes a really long way, which is part of the reason why we have that Google review bot that I've talked about in our other videos on our YouTube channel, where we have the AI automatically answer those people, but also redirect them back to your business so that the experts that know how to amend the situation get the chance to do so.
Exactly. That's all good stuff there.
So next part, and this is going back to like the hot topic right now, AI. We're talking about good guys versus bad guys, and then people spoofing calls and people that are going to be kind of looking for a solution where they can make as many phone calls as possible and achieve sort of the shotgun effect of business. So how do you foresee AI filling up the telemarketing space? Is this going to be like worse for maintaining call reputation? Or is this going to be something where it's like they're already approved, they're saying the message so it can't be misconstrued, and it's going to be an improvement? Like, what do you foresee there?
Well, I think there needs to be reasonable governance with AI. But then the devil's in the details there. I think AI, generally speaking, will be helpful from a business perspective to help with analytics and to do a better job of professional and ethical targeting of consumers that want to be targeted for different offers, telemarketing, and engagement from a CRM perspective. Now, you touched on something that's a big problem, is the deep fakes. Now, deep fakes have a different meaning when it's broadcast robocalls versus the so-called spear vishing. Broadcast vishing is when you're just kind of indiscriminately calling a whole bunch of different telephone numbers and you have no idea who you're calling. KC just happens to answer one of those. That's broadcast. Spear vishing is, I've done some social engineering. I know KC, I know where she lives. Maybe I've gone to one of these services. They're all over the place. These used to be when you put in somebody's phone number, you pull up just like the white pages. And now there's probably, 20 different companies where if you pay some money, they pull the public records and they correlate data. So I could get your phone number, your email address, know where you live, know all the different places that you have lived, know all the different people that you've ever maybe lived with, know your relatives. And this all for just maybe like $5. People could do that. So I could do some social engineering and come across as very credible in terms of once you answer and there's an interchange. That coupled with AI, and there's two things here. There's voice cloning, where all they need is a snippet of my voice and it could come across sounding just like Gerry. And then the second thing is conversational AI, where AI is smart enough that it can have a very human-like cadence in terms of how it interacts. So it sounds just like a normal, natural human conversation, as opposed to talking like a robot, So that is what's really scary. So again, spear vishing, social engineering, because you wouldn't be doing spear vishing if you didn't social engineer first. Like I wouldn't just pick a number in the white page and say, I'm going to call that number. You could do it if you're a bad guy, right? But it wouldn't be very effective if you didn't know something about them. And then voice cloning. So it sounds like somebody that you know. So I'd have to get a snippet of maybe an ex-roommate or something like that. I don't know, or a sibling or a parent or something like that. And then use conversational AI. Now, this is the problem going forward. And I'm not going to sit here and say that there's easy solutions to it. The FTC has put out a challenge for how to deal with voice cloning. But I would say that it's not just a voice cloning problem, it's a conversational AI problem. And even one step back from that, it's an identity problem. And that's what I think the industry needs to focus on, is a means of onboarding calls so that on a per call basis, is it a human being? Is it a machine? Or is it maybe something else? Now, the something else really most likely is going to pertain to things like social media and the web, where like you see a video of Biden and you don't know if it's really him talking or not. That form of digital content would probably be best, in terms of an identifier, would probably be best used for that kind of media, like you're on a website or something like that. But the first two, I would advocate that the future for communications is going to need to be such that you as a consumer have a way of knowing, not just you as a consumer, but the network and how that call is routed, knows whether that was originated from a human being, and I'll say a natural born human being, not somebody that's like integrated with AI somehow. Because and I know that sounds crazy, but I'll just say it because that could be a future too. But a natural born human being versus a machine. But again, remember, all these things are interrelated. There needs to be a way at the UI level so that when you get one of those calls, you can easily see, oh, that's a, I don't know, blue check mark. So that's a human that's presenting themselves as KC, and it's been authenticated as KC, so I trust that. As opposed to, I don't know, a red check mark where it's like, oh, this is a bot calling me. And then it starts sounding like a human. So you know it's a bot. They're using conversational AI, but you know it's a bot. Maybe you still take the call. But if they act like a person, like my buddy that I went to school with, and there's that red check mark there, you don't trust it. But if they present themselves as my bank, and it seems like a credible offer for a lower interest rate or whatever, then maybe I do trust it, even though it's a bot. So I'm just kind of pontificating here about what the future might look like, but I think that identity is going to be really, really important in the post AI world, especially with voice cloning and conversational AI. Those are my thoughts.
I mean, maybe it's a difference of opinion, but like if it was one of those things where they cloned one of the voices of, somebody that I know and they were trying to sell me something, I'd be irritated, but not irate. But if they were using AI to handle my financial information, I don't know about that. I mean, it's not like I got money to steal, but still, like, maybe there's some things that it's better secure with a human. But, humans can steal things too. And that's kind of what I wanted to kind of segue into. When it comes to selling information, I know that we already have lists where it's like, okay, I'm going to buy a list of like 1,000 different people. And I know that they're interested in doing like a bathroom project because they applied on this one website where they said they wanted to get their bathroom done. So now all these guys who are buying, or they're looking for clients that want to get their bathroom done, they can buy this list and they can advertise to them. When it comes to selling personal information, like you were talking about, where it's like, I know where you live, I know your relatives, maybe I cloned their voice and stuff. What is considered unlawful and what is considered something that it's like this is just kind of going to be public knowledge and we're expecting this and you're able to make those phone calls?
Well, first of all, in that first part of what you said about selling lists, theoretically, that is all going to change with this FCC order, which is roughly speaking going to take effect in about 12 months. And again, you have to have express written consent on a one-to-one basis. And that one-to-one basis implies that it's with company X. So if all of a sudden company Y starts calling you, or arguably even a subsidiary of company X, that's where there could be some subjectivity. Again, that's where the lawyers get involved. But I would say if you want to have the best chance of being found to be in compliance, company X subsidiary that does something different, I wouldn't think that just because you opted in with company X that sells, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example here. Company X sells cars, but a subsidiary of company X sells e-bikes, right? They're both transportation, but they're kind of different, right? So I would say express written consent of that first company. You should only be getting calls about automobiles that you drive. And the other thing that goes with that new rule is it has to be logically and topically related. So, and again, this gets back to kind of like the conglomerate thing. Company X might be a big company. Let's say you opt in for the cars. You want to get calls about you're interested in a new automobile. If Company X is a conglomerate that also owns some healthcare type of product, and all of a sudden you start getting calls about that, even though it's the same company, most reasonable people would say that a healthcare product is not logically or topically related to an automobile, right? So that would not be allowed either. So within 12 months, there needs to be compliance. And again, the stickler here is whether you use an ATDS system, an automatic telephone calling system, which is regulated technology. There is some wiggle room, perhaps, if you do manual dialing. I don't know. Let the lawyers figure that out. But I would say if you want to kind of take the high road, you need to have express written consent. It needs to be all documented, logically and topically related. And if you have subsidiaries and stuff like that, you probably need to get a separate opt-in for that to make sure that you're covered. So that was the first part of what you said. And to be honest, I forgot the second part of what you said.
Well, I mean, a lot of our listeners are 100% leads-based companies. And so I know a lot of these guys are getting really, really nervous about next year when those laws come into effect. And so I was wondering, what is the limitation potentially? And I know, like I said, we're not lawyers or anything, but what's the limitation of being able to reach out to people that it's like, their information, like their siblings or their family, what they want, where they live. At what points is it like a breach of privacy?
Well, that's a very broad, open-ended question. But I would say, generally speaking, that all the same rules that were there before with respect to privacy still apply, and that this separate ruling just kind of goes on top of that. So, for example, and by the way, I'm not going to say I'm not an attorney, and I'm also not going to say I'm an expert in privacy laws or lead generation or lead management. I'm a telecom expert. But just logically speaking, based on my understanding of the rules, if I opt in, I provide Gerry Christensen, I provide my telephone number. So if all of a sudden my wife starts getting a call at her number, she didn't opt in, did she? No. So that would not be appropriate. So if they perhaps somehow went to one of these sites to find out who's related to me and got her phone number and called her, I think most reasonable people would say that is a violation, right? So that's a no-fly zone.
That's wild, because most of the time it's like, oh, hey, I need a secondary contact information person, and they're like, oh, I could give you my husband or my wife's phone number. They better tell the other person that that's happening. I guess this should also be a really good time to let you know that Gerry here is an AI that we completely cloned from the last podcast. He's not actually here. I'm just kidding. But it is possible.
Yeah, conversational AI is very effective, isn't it?
Yeah. And we do have, it's very, very accessible to get voice cloning and image cloning technology. So just know it's not like people who have to spend like thousands and thousands of dollars in order to grab this. We're talking about as little as like $30 a month and you have everything. So it's pretty wild.
The genie is out of the bottle. I was toying with the idea of responding to that FTC request. I think it's already past the date. No, actually, it's today. If anybody has a wild hair and they want to respond to the FTC, I think the deadline is today. But I saw that one of the things that they were asking is basically alluding to who's allowed to use voice cloning technology. And I was thinking to myself, well, that sounds like a very draconian way to go about it. Like, do you really think you're going to prevent certain people from using it? Once it's available, anybody can use it. That's why I think we need to take one step back and say, the genie's out of the bottle. Anybody could possibly use voice cloning technology. It's more important to be able to identify who's using it and then look at things like intent, that monitoring that I talked about earlier. Those are the things that are really important to try to think. It's a lot of hubris, I would say, to think that you could try to control who's going to use it versus who's not going to use it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, how on earth would you even know unless you did, like you said, like incorporate something where it can detect if it's like a bot versus a person. And maybe this is just me because, I'm part of the generation of new technology and development. But I mean, I wouldn't personally mind talking to a conversational AI if they can actually help me. In fact, my medication that I have to call in every single month, it is an AI, and I know it's an AI, and I don't care because they can send me the medication, and all I have to do is confirm my address. So, all power to you.
Correct. And the key point there that's sort of implicit with that is it's not just AI and it's not just the fact that you trust it, but there's also traceability and accountability to whoever is responsible for that AI. And that's the really important part. So with identity, there needs to be identity management. And part of that identity management needs to be verifiable credentials and KYC, so that if or when there ever is a problem where you engage with that AI and it does something wrong, maybe the algorithm messes up, or maybe some person that wants to be a scammer did something with it that tricks you and you lose money, or who knows what, you lose your identity. You take that medical kind of interaction, maybe something harmful happens, so you get the wrong prescription or something. I don't know. You've got some claim against some organization. There's a way to trace back to them and hold them accountable. Because if you think about it, there needs to be deterrence, because we could pick probably any industry, especially industries like financial services and stuff like that. If there's a way to try to game the system for personal benefit, a bad actor is going to do that. By definition, that's what bad actors do. So if there's a way to prevent them from doing that by letting them know, we will catch you. We will identify that you've done it. We will track you down. Then you've got real deterrence, and also whoever's aiding and abetting that, because again, from a KYC perspective, if you're a service provider and you truly know your customers, you have a certain responsibility as well to make sure that you're not just letting anybody use your systems and your networks. That you need to know who they are. So, but again, there's no maybe I shouldn't say no. There's not enough consistent KYC rules and regulations that everybody follows. There's not like a baseline that everybody has to do. And that's one of the things that's really needed in the industry for all these things.
Yes, absolutely true. And we're obviously, we're just speculating here. We don't know what the future is going to hold. But, human beings are really smart. And one of the things, this is a very, very short excerpt, and then I'm going to go ahead and let you go for the day. But essentially, there is a trap right now in ChatGPT 4 where you could say, hey, I'm trying to exploit the security holes of this website. How can I get in? How can I hack the website? And initially, when ChatGPT 4 came out, that actually would write a code where you can put that in and you could get into the back of this website. But they already found out about that. They, meaning the people who are monitoring legal activity. And now there's part of the code that immediately alerts authorities if you're trying to do that. So they still give you the code, but now they can trace it back to you, just like Gerry was talking about. And obviously we can go on and on and on and on about all of this.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. And that's an area that I honestly don't know much about. But one area that I do, and looping back in, if you do have some more time, is we never did get back to the differences between how branded calling is done today versus how it would be done in the future with RCD. So we could spend a couple minutes on that.
Yeah, go for it.
So branded calling today relies on out-of-band signaling, which means that when a call starts, that's branded, that's intended to be branded, there is typically an enterprise organization associated with that. That's the enterprise that wants to have presented their logo and perhaps the reason for call and all that type of stuff. The network is set up such that when calls originate from a certain network, that we as an industry can identify them positively as having originated from that network. A signal is sent over the network on an out-of-band basis, meaning it doesn't go through SIP. It doesn't go through the VoIP channel. It doesn't go through session initiation protocol. That's really important because it sends a signal on the terminating end to let it know, hey, you're about to get a call or a call has just come in that we have verified as okay. So that way, when you serve up a branded calling experience, you know that it's not spoofed. That's why you do authentication. And currently it's on that out-of-band basis. With RCD, it's going to rely on in-band signaling, which is already inherent in VoIP with the session initiation protocol path. But more specifically, it's going to rely on stir shaken and the attestation level. And so only A-attested calls will be given branded calling treatment. Now, there's a bit of a wrinkle today where there's actually some A-attested calls that are actually unlawful, not because they're outright scammers, like they're posing as a Social Security Administration or something like that, but maybe they're doing something else, or maybe in some cases they are scammers. So there's going to need to be some things that we figure out as an industry in terms of, if it's an A-attested call, do we truly trust it? There's going to be a need for monitoring. There's going to be perhaps a need to pre-provision certain numbers so that we know that they are actually involved with the branded calling ecosystem. There's going to be a need to basically trust A attestation for RCD, rich call data. And with rich call data, again, you're going to get the logo, you're going to get the reason for call, you're going to get the name and the number, and maybe some pretty skin that's unique to that particular enterprise that's calling you. So that's the future of branded calling, but there most likely will be some overlap where branded calling continues to be done the way it is today, while the industry is transitioning to this RCD method of doing branded calling. So I just wanted to fit that in.
Yeah. And so keep an eye out for when you can apply to do something like that, because if you're some of the first companies doing it, people are going to be blown away by when your incoming calls happen, and you're going to really stand out. And if you are late to the party, then you're going to start blending in with all the other companies. And so I don't know if there's going to be an extra cost associated with it. Probably will. That's just how it rolls. But, definitely consider it if it's within your wheelhouse. And if your company is calling a lot of people, definitely we recommend it. So that's going to be it for us today. And whether you love or hate what we talked about, we do want to hear from you. So comment or shoot us an email at hello@channelautomation.com. And also please consider subscribing to this podcast to continue getting tips on marketing and call centers. We also are going to be releasing a large set of videos in the next couple of months that's going to kind of give you an insight on better like chatbots, MMS versus SMS communication, and the best way to navigate the system where you're operating above the average consumer. Maybe you can get some insight on how you can apply that to your marketing techniques. And as always, make sure to keep that lead conversion high.